Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 364. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Monday, June the 10th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. A Monday morning podcast on a day that's not a holiday? What's going on? More on that at a later date. But today you have a podcast, and the topic of today's podcast, today's essay, is Climate Change, Embrace It. This has been a mantra of mine, maybe, at least something I've talked about. And I guess to make a short story long, as I get older, and I'd like to think that you too, dear listeners, as you get older, you become a bit wiser. And the era of divisive politics that we're in right now is just maddening. It's everything is totally black and totally white. Nothing is gray, nothing is beige, okay? And it's either this way or that way. You're either for us or you're against us. You're either the second coming of Jesus Christ or the devil incarnate, and there's nothing in between. There's nobody from a opposing party, opposing group, opposing number of people who could possibly have something in common with you. Dear listeners, nothing could be further from the truth, because that's the way people are. That's the way we are. And climate change is one of those issues. Whereas if you're a climate change denier, then you're a ridiculous human being who's not very smart. I'll just say that, okay? Now, that's not to say that your SUV is causing global warming and the earth is going to come to an end unless you drive an electric car. That's not what I'm saying at all. To say that climate change is a real thing is just saying, you know what? The weather's different now than it was 10, 15, 50, 100 years ago. And that's just a fact. Here's a fact. Here's the difference between fact and opinion. To those of you who don't know. Now, again, my listenership are very intelligent human beings, so I'm probably preaching to the choir. But there's fact and there's opinion. An opinion is the Cardinals, St. Louis Cardinals, are a horrible baseball team. That's an opinion. A fact is the St. Louis Cardinals beat the Colorado Rockies yesterday 5-1. Now, you can argue, discuss, debate whether or not the Cardinals are a horrible team. You cannot argue, discuss, debate the fact that they won the game yesterday 5-1. That's a fact. An opinion is because you drive SUVs, the world is going to melt and everyone's going to starve. That's an opinion. The fact is, climate is different now than it was 50 years ago. And by the way, it was different now than it was a long, long, long time ago. About 150 years ago, the Thames River froze over. That hasn't happened since then. Things were different back then. We had an ice age once upon a time. We had a Krakatoa volcano that erupted to put a cloud over the whole earth, and we had bad crops for a year and a half because the sun couldn't shine through the cloud. Things change all the time, okay? And you can't say we have climate change, we don't have climate change. We all need to drive electric cars. We all need to drive 3 mile to the gallon SUVs, or we all need to start walking, or we all need to become hunter-gatherers. I talked about that briefly in last week's podcast. But the fact of the matter is the climate is changing. Now, my personal opinion is, and that's based on just not what I think, but on what I've read. I read a lot, and those of you who listen to my podcast know that. Some would say I read too much. Maybe that's true, maybe that's false. That's another opinion to discuss at a later time. But from what I read is that, you know what? If we didn't drive internal combustion engines, if we didn't have coal-powered power plants, if we didn't have agriculture that was row crops, okay, then maybe things would be a little different with the climate. Oh, and by the way, we wouldn't have 8 billion people in the world either, because 3/4 of them will have starved to death. Okay. So you can't have this and that. The biggest contributor to climate change may in fact be that there's 8 billion people who want to live their lives living on this earth. Another big deal with climate change is the sun. The sun changes. It goes through cycles, okay? Sometimes it's hot, sometimes it's cooler. And it doesn't matter what we do. If the sun starts to get a little hotter, we're going to be warmer. Back in the 70s, there was talk, I remember this, and you may too, there was talk of the upcoming ice age that we're going to have soon, because the sun was starting to get into a phase where it was cooler, and things were cooling off just a little bit, and people were losing their mind. Oh my gosh. What I'm saying is we have climate change. Now, we can wring our hands and say, woe is me, the world's going to end next week, or we can embrace it. And embracing climate change is really the best thing we can do. I've got a couple of examples as to how we're going to do that. And again, that's what today's essay is. Climate change. Embrace it. One thing I did want to touch base on before we get into that, though, a story that's been in the news, and you've probably seen I've backed off on the controversy on the podcast, because there's no need in arguing points that we can't do anything about. But I did have to say one thing on one issue that is in the news all the time, and I will just say that people that I thought were rational thinkers aren't thinking rationally on this, and it has to do with the Israeli-Palestinian war and this whole thing in Gaza that's going on. The fact that there's people calling for the end of Israel, get the Jews out of the Middle East, give the Palestinians the whole thing, waving Nazi flags. I mean, that is insane. Like I said, I've had people who I believe are rational thinkers, moderate people, just damning Israel for what they've done in Gaza. Now, I think they could have done things differently. They used a sledgehammer, or maybe a ball peen hammer would have worked. But here's the thing, and I've asked this question of these people who have lost their mind on Israel, and are calling for Israel to just back off, to stop this and stop that, and give the Palestinians what they want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the two questions that I've asked, and I've not had one even attempt to answer it. They go down a rabbit hole with something else. Number one, here's another fact. There were a group of Israelis who were having a picnic, having a party, having a fun time in the desert. And a bunch of Palestinians came in, murdered many of them. They were unarmed, murdered many of them, took like 240 of them hostage, okay, and took them back to Gaza. What was Israel supposed to do? The Palestinians won't release those hostages. And when I say Palestinians, I really mean Hamas, because Hamas and Hezbollah are the two organizations, especially Hamas in Gaza, who are the driving force behind all this. I suspect that many Palestinians who live in Gaza and the West Bank, for that matter, and in Israel for that matter, would rather Hamas just back off. But Hamas is in charge. They were freely elected, and now they're in charge, and they rule with an iron fist. They do what they want. What was Israel supposed to do? Okay. Number two, people who say, look, there just needs to be a separate Palestinian state. And Israel won't do that. I can kind of understand why they won't do that. Let me just propose something. Let's just say that the Palestinians came to the Israelis and said, you know what? We want a separate Palestinian state, because they've done this before. And Israel has countered with, okay, let's talk about it maybe, but you got to back off on the elimination of the Jews from the river to the sea, which means from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's what the Palestinians want. They want a Palestinian state that includes all that, and they want all the Jews gone. Now, some say they want all the Jews gone. The moderate Palestinians say they want all the Jews gone. The radical Palestinians say they want all the Jews dead. Okay? So, okay, we'll listen to you about a separate state, but you have to either leave or all of you have to die. How do you negotiate that? You can't. Okay? So all of you who think that the Palestinians, Hamas, are the good guys with the white hats in this war, dear listeners, you're wrong. And if you like, send me an email. I'll be happy to correspond with you personally. But buyer beware on this. We will not have a conversation wearing kid gloves. Okay, back to the essay, Climate Change, Embrace It. Okay, a couple of things going on here with climate change. First of all, we have crops that are not doing well. That's a fact, because the climate is changing. And there's two ways to look at this. Number one is, woe is me, the world's going to come to an end. The New York Times says God is dead and the war has begun, okay? The other way is, how do we get around this? Because there's all kinds of ways to get around this. Because change doesn't mean Armageddon. Change just means things are a bit different than before. And we'll start with number one, cars. I'm a car guy. I love cars. They're wonderful. To those of you who do not share my love for cars, be cool. We're not gonna talk about the electrics on a 51 Jaguar Mark 7 or anything like that. Okay, we're gonna talk about cars that you and I drive, why we do it, what's happened to them, and an example as to how things are just going to be okay. And that's kind of how things end up. If you look at things rationally, if you look at things prudently, things always seem to come out in the wash. Okay, they just do. They seem to always come out in the wash in the end. If you exercise due diligence, pay attention, and make the right decisions. Not too long ago, the price of new cars went through the roof. And people bought them because the price of used cars had gone through the roof. Well, now there's another problem. Nobody wants a new car. And I say nobody, that's not exactly true, but new car sales are way, way down. Used cars now have become more popular, and there's two reasons. First of all, I rent a lot of new cars while I'm on the road. And I've said this before. Those of you who follow the podcast remember me saying this. There are very few, if any, new cars out there that trip my trigger. They're basically just transportation. They're soulless, rolling boxes that get you from point A to point B, and that's about it. Many of them are so complex that I don't figure out how to operate the controls. I understand why that is, because there's so many controls on cars now, and everything's done on a touch screen, which, by the way, how can that be safe? It takes 17 steps to change the station on your radio. So while you got one hand off the wheel and both eyes on the screen, you're driving down the road. How can that be safe? I don't think it is. That's okay. Just put 18 more airbags in the thing and more sensors and let the car drive itself so you don't get into the wrong lane. So that's how they've solved that problem, and it's not solving the problem at all. All this stuff costs money. Okay? And the biggest thing about these new cars now, and it's not just the political class, America's fleet of cars and trucks had gotten long in the tooth. In fact, they still are, because there's really nothing new coming out as far as vehicles go. There's new features, there's new items, but it just makes things complex. Now, once upon a time, in fact, last month in the study, the average car was 12 and a half years old. if you take out if you only have passenger cars, 14 years old. The average age of a passenger car on the street now is 14 years old. That's amazing. Why is that? Well, first of all, the old adage, well, they don't make them like they used to. Cars didn't used to last 14 years. They just didn't. Okay? They didn't. Now, in the past, the average age statistic was taken as a sign of transportation's burden on the household budget. Now, those burdens remain near all-time highs. Why do you say that? Well, you know what the average price of a new car is? $47,000. That's the price of a new car. The average price of a new car. And this has happened quite some time ago, but I paid $40,000 for my first house back in 1980. And the quintessential sign of an old man is when you make the statement, why, price of a car? Why, I didn't pay that for my first house. Well, that ship sailed a long time ago, friends. And while inflation and interest rates are backing way down from recent highs, insurance premiums are going through the roof. They're rising by double digits. And you say, well, how can that be? Well, first of all, if you're going to insure a $15,000 car, it costs X. If you're going to insure a $40,000 car, it's X times 2 or 3, because the price is times 2 or 3. Now, many buyers are now surfing on waves of vehicle depreciation, picking up used and off-lease cars and trucks that are still under warranty for thousands of miles, and they cost thousands of dollars less than new. And that's a smart thing to do, because cars are really good nowadays. They are. And here's how things have changed. Americans have been trained from a young age that new is better than old, especially with the car industry. That's what people who brought you tail fins and planned obsolescence and generous trade-in allowances. Now, people are revolting. Who are these wide-eyed dissidents? Well, in fact, new car deniers form a broad coalition of the unpersuaded. I'm one of them, by the way. Some fear that new digitally connected vehicles could expose their personal information to the Chinese, or worse, to their insurance companies. I'm not a big believer in that, but there's some truth to it. Now, other modern marvel people are eager to avoid or even include these stop-start cycling systems. It shuts the engine off to save fuel, okay? They're mandatory on all new vehicles. CVTs, continuously variable transmissions. Those are on compact vehicles, and they're fine, but they're goofy. And the transmissions don't last as long. They break, and you can't really fix them. You got to replace them. DEF, diesel exhaust fuel. It's a post-combustion exhaust treatment if you have a diesel engine for modern turbo diesels, and you got to have it. It's just more money and hassle, okay? Now, others are just trying to hang on to good things that they've got. Like, for me, 2 of my 4 vehicles have 3 pedals on the floor. One of them's a stick shift, a manual transmission, and they're basically extinct on new cars. Or how about built-in CD players? New cars don't have those. And how many hundreds of CDs do many people have? Well, you dinosaur, you don't need CDs. Just go ahead and subscribe to a service and pay more money for something you already have. That's stupid. People don't want to do that. Now, what unites these people is their conviction that older cars are not just cheaper, but check this out. They're better. And that touchscreens totally suck. Now, there's a wide net on social media, and they post the question, hey, name a new car, truck, or SUV that's not as desirable as the design it replaces. And there's a long list. In other words, these cars have come out, and people have said, you know what? The old one's better and cheaper. That list includes, and this isn't me talking, this is a survey, okay? And some of these are very iconic vehicles. Toyota Land Cruiser, the Mini Cooper, the Ford Mustang, the Toyota Crown, used to be called the Avalon, the Ford F-150 truck, and just about every model of BMW you can think of. Wow. If you're an industry watcher, you have to recognize this trend as something of a after-party hangover. Now, whether the car buying public has been aware of it or not, but the past 30 years have been some of the best times for automobiles for those who love them. I have been aware. That ship has sailed, friends. Now, in an era where engineers had all the advantage of computer-assisted design and precision manufacturing while still wielding the primal force of combustion, perfect example. I was in Atlanta last week, and we visited a customer. And this guy and his son, they are the North American sales office for a Japanese machine tool company. And our company sells products that go into these machines, okay? And we visited the guy. Okay, these are Japanese people who came over from Japan. They're here in the U.S. And the old man bought a new car, a 1986 Corvette Stingray, the official pace car. He bought this at a what do you want to call him? A collector. He's a collector, okay? And his son doesn't like the car because it's loud, it stinks, and the suspension is crap. That's what the kid says. Well, it is loud because it's not electric. It is stinky because in 1986 they didn't have the exhaust and emissions that the new ones have, and these cars didn't handle like the new ones do. The new cars handle fantastically. I mean, just compared to two cars. One of them's not even that new, but when I compare my my '08 Saturn Sky Redline to my 2017 Jaguar XE, they don't handle anything alike. The Jaguar handles so much better because computers helped tune the car. Computers helped with the suspension, okay? But these older cars, they're not that old, just a few years old compared to the new ones. They're just, the old ones are just better and they're cheaper. In fact, they're called gently used gems, okay? A few of the models we talked about. A sports car, Porsches. Everyone loves Porsches, okay? The snapshot of the good Porsches, 2009 to 2013. Because they're better. Because they're cheaper, they're less complex, they're fun to drive because they have the modern suspension and the modern engine. In fact, you could buy a 911 Carrera from that time period, 2009 to 2013, 500 horsepower, 7-speed manual gearbox. You can't get those anymore, okay? The Ford Mustang, the 5.0 liters that they made from 2015 to 2023, just last year. That was the peak year for the pony car, okay? They had independent rear suspension, so that's modern, and an optional 6-speed manual transmission. No electronic driving nannies to worry about, okay? Now they've retuned it all. You can't even get the automatic manual gearbox. Subaru Outbacks, those of you who are Subaru fans, okay? Even the ones that they made from 2014 to 2019 was not really that modern. It was old school, but they didn't have that dopey touchscreen in the center. People don't want that touchscreen. The price has gone through the roof. You have a touchscreen, and why does one buy a Subaru? Reliability, four-wheel drive. If you want to play video games, stay at home in your mom's basement. The Toyota Avalon, okay? People love that car. They don't have it anymore. They now have the Toyota Crown, which actually is a good-looking car in some opinions. But really, most people who look at the Crown say, wow, you spent all this money on a redesign? I like the Avalon better. And because it's a discontinued model, you can buy them a whole lot cheaper. They made the Avalon from 1995 to 2022. That's 27 years they made that car. I guess it was time for a facelift, but guess what? The people don't like the new car. They like the old one better. And those carefree, underregulated days are over, however. In fact, in the past decade, has seen car makers retire large and thirsty V8s for more and more efficient V6s and even i4s. Okay, tiny engines with forced induction. One or two turbochargers, a daisy chain of sensors and control modules and codeware. Such model power plants require premium fuel. So that's the thing. A lot of these new little cars, yeah, they get great gas mileage, but you got to pay. You got to buy 93 octane fuel for them. And friends, at my gas station, 93 octane versus 87 octane, it's 80 cents a gallon more. How is that cheaper? It's not. Now, the regulatory hill for the IC-powered internal combustion that is powered, only gets steeper from here. By 2032, gas-burning vehicles need to be hybrids. In fact, you're not going to be able to buy a pure ICE car in 2032. They got to be hybrids with motors and more complexity. Okay. And that's really, it's ridiculous. Okay. People are just embracing the old cars. Another old car. There was a guy named Miles Levy. He lives in Los Angeles. His article talks about, he loves his 2011 Range Rover. In fact, any new car feels like it's just not the same thing. Lexus, the old V8 engines, yeah, they don't get great gas mileage, but you know what? They don't break, and they're cheaper to insure because they don't have the sensors in them. Okay, there's one model of Hyundai, I forget what it is, but it's a reasonably priced Hyundai. It's not one of the expensive Genesis Hyundai cars, but it's a reasonably priced car. If you get into a collision, I want to say it's on the right front fender. If a car pops you there, you'd look at this thing and say, okay, you need a bumper, maybe some side sheet metal, you'll be good. No, because that's where all the sensors are and the computer is. And if it breaks all that, your car that listed for like $27,000 5-6 years ago, it's totaled. Cars get totaled quickly because they can't be replaced. Toyota Highlanders, okay? One guy named Dan Barkin, he's a retired newspaper editor in North Carolina. He said, recently my wife bought a new Toyota Highlander, and it comes with a semester at MIT to learn the turn signal. Now, of course, he's exaggerating, but not a whole lot. And people just refuse to sell their cars, like the Ford F-150s, okay? The 13th generation F-150 pickup truck featured lightweight aluminum body panels and the optional Coyote V8 engines, okay? And before 2017, you didn't have the dopey start-stop cycling, okay? The Toyota Sequoia, the big monster, they stopped making that in 2022. But the second generation of Sequoias are powered by well-tested V8 engines that really will last forever. I mean, not forever, but a long time. The big V8 Toyota engine that they put in the Sequoias and the Tundras. I personally talked to a guy who had a Toyota Tundra with that engine. We were picking up parts at a vendor's, and I had our truck, and he said, I mean, that car looked great. I said, how many miles in that car? He smiled. He said 500,000. It had 500,000 miles on it. He still uses it every day for work. The new ones have V6s, which get better gas mileage, but they have a twin turbo and a hybrid V6. So yeah, they have the same power, but it takes an electric motor to help it along, and twin turbos, which twin turbos are fine for racing, but not for everyday use because turbos break and they're expensive. The Nissan Frontier, that's an old school compact truck. Don't have those anymore because everything's mid-size and big-size trucks. So if you want a compact truck, sorry, friends, they don't have it anymore. We talked about the Lexus. I mean, the V8s in those Lexuses are just fantastic. They last forever. Lexus is Toyota, okay? So how does this even relate to climate change? Well, here's the thing. How does it help climate change if the new car costs more than you can afford? The new car costs a ton of money to be insured. The new car has so many touch screens on it that it's an accident waiting to happen. Okay. I'm a big person that says, you need to pay attention and drive. Okay. And when I see people driving the way they do, it seems like they've lost their mind and don't know how to drive anymore. And I say they're probably playing with their phone or they're working on their touch screens. Okay. Sometimes things are better when they were older. Now, there was an engineer. In fact, he's Maserati's global head of design. His name is Klaus Busse. And he had an interview with Drive magazine recently. And he said, look, we got to have the touch screens. Okay. Sure, it takes away from the car's driving character, but we got to have touch screens because what he said, look, if I were to put a button for everything, a Maserati cabin would look like an old 747 airplane. That's a sign that there's too much stuff on a car. You know the old saying, shut up and sing? Shut up and drive. Oh, and by the way, if you don't drive that old car and you throw it in the trash and buy a new one, that adds to the landfill too, my friends. Drive the old cars. They're better, they're cheaper, they're faster, they're cooler. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. Oh, and by the way, the young people, how have they gotten around this? Easy. Young people don't buy new cars at all. In fact, young people don't drive cars at all. I read an article not too long ago, in fact, last week, about how young people, they're just driving these little motor scooters around. Some are electric, some are little two-strokes. They hit 16, and okay, you can get your driver's license now because these little 49 cc's, you don't need a driver's license for them. Okay, they're legal on the road. You don't need a license plate. You don't need a driver's license. And these young people are saying, no thanks, I'll just keep driving my little motor scooter. In our neighborhood, and maybe in yours, golf carts have gotten extremely popular. Now, it used to be to go to and from the golf course, or to and from the beach, or to and from the country club. Now it's to and from the store. And in my neighborhood anyway, the golf cart, that's kind of your second car now. Okay, so you don't need two cars. You just need one. Your second one's your golf cart or your 49cc scooter. They're cheap to run. They're easy to fix. They don't cost any money. You don't have to license them. People find their way around stuff. They always have, and they always will. Okay, let's get off of cars. Let's talk about climate change on the stuff that really affects our life, affects absolutely everybody's life. And everybody loves this, by the way, too. And that's food. Climate change is affecting food in many ways because as the climate changes, certain foods grow well in certain climates. And if the climate changes, then the type of food that you grow changes as well. The price of olive oil, for instance, it's doubled over the past 2 years. Why? Because hot weather and drought have baked olive groves around the Mediterranean, where much of the olive oil in the world comes from. Now, some people say it doesn't make sense to pay $10 for a half-liter bottle of olive oil, so they stop buying it. Okay? In fact, some people have substituted lemon juice for olive oil. Okay? Well, this is terrible. Global warming, we're not going to have our olive oil anymore. Now, as the world warms, extreme weather is disrupting the production of some of life's great comforts, including olive oil and wine, by the way, and coffee and cocoa. Those are the big four. Now, we don't need any of that to live, but we need all of that to smile, okay? And people like to smile, okay? Now, some of these crops, wine, olive oil, coffee, and cocoa, they're concentrated in one or two regions, which means wonky weather in one part of the world can have a dizzying impact on global prices. In fact, heat waves and the untimely rain in West Africa have sent cocoa prices to record levels this year. Of course, chocolate makers raise their prices because cocoa is used in chocolate. Traders are hoarding coffee after a severe drought in Vietnam hit. And the world's second largest producer is pushing prices of Robusta beans, which I don't drink, but that's okay, to a 45-year high. Now, Robusta beans are the ones you use in like Folgers and the coffee in the cans at the stores, okay? I prefer Arabica beans, but those have also become costlier because of drought. In Italy, heavy rain caused a surge in a grape-devouring mildew. So wine has gone up because there's less good wine now. Higher prices ultimately filter down. In fact, there was an Italian chef. His name is Francisco Mazzetti. He runs a restaurant in Corinth Palace. That's a luxury hotel on the central Mediterranean island of Malta. He says the trick is knowing which dishes can be made with olive oil alternatives, like pasta bolognese, which he adds richness with pancetta. That's a type of pork, okay? But for a caprese salad, you got to have olive oil because there's no plan B. Now, you have to use extra virgin olive oil. You can't put avocado oil on it or something like that. In fact, it just changes the whole thing. So what are we going to do, okay, with olive oil? More on that later. The Indonesian island of Java, which makes tons of coffee, their crops have gone bad, okay? And the prices of that coffee have gone up over 50% because they have to irrigate. In India, there's a coffee grower. He's been hit by a double whammy. First came unusually heavy rains last year that split the outer skins of the coffee beans, and they hurt the flavor. Now, a big heat wave hit starting in April of this year. And those coffee plants that were left, the flowers, when they popped, they withered. And he says it's gonna affect next year's production by about 25%. Now, as the weather gets more extreme, we're going to have more of these problems, okay? Vietnam, West Africa, the Mediterranean. What are we going to do, okay? Well, there's always an alternative now. There's always an alternative, isn't there? Did we talk about wine? No, we got to talk about wine. In Bordeaux, they've had problems. They've had fires. They've had drought. They have more rain. In fact, the higher temperatures have changed the way Bordeaux tastes. High temperatures mean sweeter wine, okay? To some that's good, to others not so much. So what have they done to try to adapt? Well, they've stopped thinning the leaves on the plants. In other words, so the grapes get more shade. That's one way around it. Or maybe the price of, or the taste of Bordeaux is just going to change just a little bit. Do you think Bordeaux tastes differently than it did 100 years ago? I'm sure it did, but there's nobody around to really talk about that because they're all dead. There's all kinds of ways to go around this, however, because France is not the only place they make wine. Italy and Greece is not the only place they have olive oil. West Africa is not the only place that makes cocoa. And Indonesia and Vietnam are not the only places that have coffee. In fact, some winemakers have ventured El Norte in search of milder weather. New Zealand, northern France, South Africa, they're getting a new taste of how climate change was affecting global production, and they got ahead of the game. Okay? Now, here's the deal. They just changed the place where they grow the grapes, okay? They're ripping up vineyards in Spain, in France, and in Italy. It's burning in Bordeaux and hailing in Italy. So they just changed places they grow grapes. You know where they're starting to grow a lot of grapes now? Canada, the UK, and check this out, Sweden. Yeah, in Sweden, because things have gotten warmer, okay? They just grow stuff in different areas. Because if we have climate change, if things are getting warmer, then just go north. And that's what people are doing. In fact, olives. It's a classic Mediterranean crop. You know where they're growing olives now? Austria. That's right. Just the other side of the Alps. In fact, olives aren't a customary crop for Austrian farmers. But Austria's warming climate is beginning to resemble the typical climate of its neighbors on the other side of the Alps. So they won't grow them in Italy anymore as much. They'll start growing them in Austria. And who knows, it may even be better. Now, still, it will take time for global consumers to benefit from new olive oil supply. Olive trees, like coffee and cocoa trees, they do take years to reach maturity. So production can't be brought online overnight. Olives need to be processed at special mills, which Austria doesn't have yet. Austrians are a Germanic people. You don't think they'll figure it out? In the meantime, olive oil is going to cost a little bit more. Okay, so it does. Okay? But we have climate change. There's ways to go about things. Oh, by the way, you know where they're growing coffee now? California. Yep. All these people said, oh my gosh, the California, the weather is killing the California grape crop. Well, it's not killing it, but it is affecting it. But you know what? They're replacing them with coffee beans because the weather's better for coffee now. So, again, we do have climate change, but we've always had climate change. We always have change of all types of things. Now, you have two choices, dear listeners. You can wring your hands. You can cause your blood pressure to go up. You can lose your mind over something that you cannot change. Or you can embrace it. How about a nice coffee from Austria, or nice olive oil from Austria, or a nice coffee from California, or a nice wine from Sweden. Why not? Who knows? They might even taste better than the ones you had before. Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's the email address. Got more emails this week. Thank you, dear listeners. I love the emails. I love corresponding with you. I love talking with the listeners. And have a chance to do that even more in the future. Again, more on that as in a later date, a soon date, because a change is coming to the podcast. Have I piqued your interest? Wonderful. Keep listening. I'll let you know what's going on. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.